Good evening. I would like to call the business meeting of the Portland Board of Education together to order. It is Tuesday, September 19th, 2017, and the Portland Board of Public Education is meeting at City Hall in Council Chambers. May I ask the superintendent to please call the roll?
Yes, Ms. Seeliger,
Here.
Ms. Vendel,
Here.
Ms. Davis, here. Ms. Thompson,
Here.
Ms. Morioni is not here. Mr. Eder,
Here.
Mr. Rodriguez,
Presente.
Ms. Donato,
Here.
and Ms. Farah,
Here.
and then Chair Trevorrow.
Here. And Ms. Morioni did let us know that she is traveling this evening, so she won't be with us. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
For the report of the chair tonight, I just wanted to ask board members, and Ms. Thompson, thank you for reminding me of this earlier in the week, that you should have received an email from the National School Board Association announcing the save the date for their annual convention for 2018. And we wanted to ask board members if you are interested in attending that conference to let us know in the upcoming week. The early registration begins October 18th, so that's coming right up. The date of the actual convention is not until April 7th through 9th, 2018, and it's going to be in San Antonio. So if you do want to attend that, have interest in going, let myself and the superintendent know, and we'll be able to put some costs together and come back to the board for approval for funding for potential travels to that convention. And that concludes the report of the chair. Moving into report of the students, we have Deering High School.
Hello. So I was just talking about our year so far at Deering. Deering has kicked off the school year to a nice start, welcoming our new principal, Greg Palmer. Hi, Ms. Palmer. Has been very positive for the Deering climate. He, along with fellow staff members, have actually began greeting students one by one at the door, which has been a very refreshing way to start the day, I saw. Mr. Palmer began his year by personally introducing himself to each class separately in our auditorium. Sorry, I can't speak. Establishing connections and opening himself up as a resource for the students, evidently and very quickly. He shared a presentation that included personal facts, values, goals he has for our school, and very creatively incorporated last year's graduating class's quotes in a way to highlight the importance of Deering's climate and things that he held as an important standard for both students and staff. And I also like to thank him for letting me interview him for my sociology project. School class senates have begun, and we're already planning our a full school year calendar for different events and fundraisers to be held, as well as opening up our student president's council to representatives from various groups to hear some of their ideas for the year and how we could be of help. Our Deering Seeds of Peace traveled to Augusta for the annual Bridges to Peace, marching and demonstrating messages to advocate for current events, as well as peace, I should say. Our open house was this past Monday from 6 to 8 p.m., where parents were free to follow their student schedule and meet their teachers. Our fall sports are coming to an end, marking halfway through the season. Deering is holding various explaining the FAFSA events and an upcoming college fair, as well as continuing our translated weekly newsletters in different languages that are prevalent in Deering. Our cheerleaders have been selling ribbons to support suicide prevention services. And lastly, Deering was named Maine's most beautiful high school. And Architectural Digest, one of every state, was chosen, and Deering got that. So, thank you.
Thank you. Report of the superintendent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we begin the day with great news. 3 Portland Public School students have been named semifinalists in the 2018 National Merit Scholarship Program. These academically talented students will have the opportunity to compete for 7,500 National Merit Scholarships worth over $32 million offered next spring. The 3 semifinalists are Lucy Tumavikas, a student at Deering High School, and Lucy is with us tonight, and Jessica Brown and Samuel Merman, both of whom attend Portland High School. These students are among 16,000 semifinalists nationwide. Semifinalists were selected from a pool of about 1.6 million high school juniors that entered the 2018 competition by taking the 2016 preliminary SAT, which is also the National Merit Scholarship qualifying test. The semifinalists represent less than 1% of U.S. high school seniors and include the highest scoring entrants in each state according to the nonprofit National Merit Organization. Of the 16,000 semifinalists, about 15,000 are expected to advance to the finalist level of the competition, and of those finalists, about half will win a National Merit Scholarship and become National Merit Scholars. The 2018 National Merit Scholarship winners will be announced in April. As I mentioned, Lucy Tumavikas is with us tonight, and Lucy is an amazing student. I understand from talking to her earlier that this is a return to recognition by the board, having won the spelling bee as an 8th grader. So she is no stranger to these parts. Lucy has an amazing GPA. She's a spectacular student. As a junior, she earned 55 credits already. This year, she's taking a bunch of very challenging courses. She has AP Calculus, AP Government, AP Literature, and AP Spanish. So Lucy is obviously an exemplary student, someone that we are incredibly proud of, and we're very happy to be able to recognize you today. So.
Hello? Okay. I just wanted to thank you very much for this recognition. It's really exciting. And this accomplishment is largely, a result of 12 years in the Portland Public School System. So thank you for that also, and especially during high school. So shout out to Dr. Ahmed and Mr. Palmer who are here tonight. And thanks to my family for being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lucy. We're obviously very proud and very grateful for your family. Obviously, all of the work that you're doing, all of the challenging courses that you're taking require a strong network of support, and it's very clear that you have it. So thank you for everything that you do for Lucy, and thank you for being here. Congratulations are also in order for Moore Middle School teacher Carrie Foster. Carrie was selected as one of 35 Fulbright Distinguished Teacher Fellows nationally. Through this program, Carrie will be traveling to Singapore for the 2nd semester of the school year. There, she'll be assigned to a school of education and will be involved in school visits and school studies. Carrie is particularly interested in Singapore's effort to reduce achievement gaps by focusing on character and citizenship education. The goal is for Carrie to bring what she learns back and share that with her colleagues here in Portland. Carrie is a National Board Certified teacher who's always seeking new learning opportunities. She will bring her lessons learned back to help us shape our professional development for our teachers. Congratulations, Ms. Foster, and thank you for your commitment to professional learning. As we heard from Ms. Farah, we're honored that Architectural Digest selected Deering High School as Maine's most beautiful high school building as part of their recent feature highlighting the most beautiful high school in every state. Deering is indeed a beautiful building and a testament to this community's historical commitment to building outstanding facilities for its students. Finally, the board agenda today includes a first read for a resolution that you will be asked to adopt at the October 3rd meeting. The resolution is part of the American Association of School Administrators I Love Public Education campaign. As part of the campaign, AASA is encouraging school districts across the country to issue a proclamation of support for public education. The resolution is designed to raise awareness of public education at a time when the federal budget projects cuts to well-established and important programs and services. And now really finally, speaking of campaigns, the Portland Public Schools Portland Promise campaign is scheduled to launch officially on October 5th with an event hosted by UNUM, who, as you know, has been a generous supporter of the district's development of this campaign, which is based on our comprehensive plan. Over 100 community leaders have been invited to join us to the launch to launch our outreach efforts, which include a postcard going to every postal patron in Portland, directing them to our new website on the Portland Promise, and introducing them to our outstanding graduates. And that really does conclude my report.
Thank you. Report of the Secretary. Consideration and action to approve the meeting minutes of August 29th. Is there a motion? Ms. Vendel, seconded by Mr. Rodriguez. Are there any questions on the meeting minutes? Ms. Thompson?
I have 2 corrections.
Okay.
Under public comment, David Elowich's name is spelled incorrectly. It's Elowitch. And then also we had public comment at the end, even though we entertained it earlier with Mr. Elowich present. We also had, before adjournment, we also had public comment again. And we need to recognize that we had one person from the public, Stephen Schwartz, speak to the board as well. So that isn't noted in the meeting minutes. So if we could fix and then add that, that'd be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the meeting minutes? Seeing none, is there any public comment on the meeting minutes? Seeing none, is there any board discussion on the meeting minutes? All those in favor of approving the meeting minutes of August 29th, 17 with those additions, please indicate. It's unanimous with the students voting in the affirmative. And consideration and action to approve the meeting minutes of September 5th, 2017. Is there a motion? Ms. Davis, seconded by Ms. Vendel. They were meant to be on this one.
So the August 29th, now that I see that, was it just a workshop? And actually, the correction should be done to the September 5th one. You probably caught that anyway, but
Okay.
thank you. Sorry about that.
Do we need to redo the vote? No, okay. Okay. Are there any questions on these meeting minutes? Seeing none, any public comment on the meeting minutes? Seeing none, any board discussion? And seeing none, all those in favor of approving the meeting minutes of September 5th, 2017, please indicate. It's unanimous with the students voting in the affirmative. And moving into report of the committees. Curriculum, Ms. Morioni is not here tonight. Is there anybody from that committee who wants to report? And seeing none, we will table that until next meeting. Operations, Ms. Davis.
Yes, the Operations Committee met on September 12th, and we reviewed much of the information that you'll be seeing in tonight's presentation later on in the meeting about transportation and the contrasting CNG versus diesel buses. The other area that we spent a fair amount of time in was reviewing the alignment of the FY19 CIP with the facilities assessment report, starting to use our Sebago Technics facilities assessment to really drive our both financial and facilities planning. And so what we did was to look at what was in the Sebago Technics report and what was in our CIP plan, and where did that essentially, what things were in both plans? Were they in the same place? Were they for the same amount? What was the alignment between those? What things were in our CIP but not in the Sebago Technics report, or vice versa? The next time we will be looking at high priority items in the Sebago Technics report, which are not in our CIP. And there are some in that category. We also took a quick look at the FY19 transportation CIP, looking at our plan for bus purchases. So beginning to work on sort of long-term planning. And we talked about also hoping to get the Sebago Technics report on the website so that people can access it, and recommending that the two people running for school board who are running unopposed should also get a copy of the plan, which I'm kind of going like this because it's about this long and about this wide and about this thick. And so having them get a copy of that actual plan so that they can begin to look at it and understand the work that we're doing as we start to align it. Our next meeting will be October 24th at 6 p.m. And as I said, we will be looking then at the high priority facilities assessment, what Sebago Technics said we needed to do soon and was important that is missing from our FY19 CIP plans at present. And then after that, we'll begin to really pull that together and figure out what should we be doing based on that report. Thank you.
Thank you. Finance, Ms. Bendel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Last Tuesday, on September 12th, the Finance Personnel Committee met to review the year end for the FY17 budget and also receive a report of the FY18 turnover savings. I'm happy to report that the district has received an over collection of revenue, approximately $220,000, and has been under and is under expenditures of approximately $1.9 million for the for expenditures this year. That is primarily coming from areas from contracted services, books and supplies, and board contingency. The superintendent and the finance director did flag that the district will be making a recommendation to the board and the city council to purchase new math textbooks this year, and they will request to use some of the unassigned fund balance for that purchase. So that's something just to keep on the board's radar.
Thank you. Policy, Legislative, and Public Affairs, Ms. Seeliger.
Thank you, Chair. Our next scheduled meeting for Policy and Public Affairs meeting will be at the Portland District Offices, Casco Bay Room, on Tuesday, September 26th at 6 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other committees and/or member concerns? Ms. Thompson.
I just want to report briefly that the Appointments Committee met, and we were due to meet again this evening. We've postponed that to a date to be determined, but we met on Tuesday the 12th and started talking about what the framework will be for the forming of that ad hoc committee to talk about the boundaries for Ocean Avenue School. So more to come on that in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving into consent items. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Davis.
I just wanted to highlight that the Hall Building Committee will be meeting tomorrow night at 6 o'clock in, I believe, the Hall School Library, and that folks should take a look. Hall School is underway. The building has begun. People have sort of, where it's not something that most people drive by, it actually it's a destination to see what's going on in that building, but ground has been broken and work is happening, so.
Great. Thank you. And Ms. Thompson.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. That prompts me to think, and I haven't looked here yet, but do we have, in previous projects, Mr. Sherwood has done a play-by-play of taking down and building up in the kids, the students being interactive, whether they're making a video or so on and so forth. And do we have any of those pictures posted to the website currently? I have not seen them, so I just didn't know if they were somewhere. Maybe I wasn't. And if not, if we could get some updates up there?
Yeah, I'm not aware of them, so I will ask Mr. Sherwood.
Great, thank you.
Any other member concerns? Seeing none, moving into consent items. Will the superintendent please read the consent items?
Presumscott School received school supplies from Nordex of Scarborough, and Paths received a 1999 Toyota Camry for their automotive class from Henry Creole of Portland. Thank you, Henry, and thank you, Nordex.
Thank you. Old business, consideration and action to approve the vote entitled Vote to Request that City Council approve to validate a supplemental 2017-2018 school budget be approved in form presented to this meeting, and that an attested copy of said vote be included with the minutes of this meeting. Is there a motion? Ms. Vendel, seconded by Ms. Davis. Would the superintendent like to speak to the motion?
As the board knows, Portland Public Schools received an additional $1.7 million roughly in additional educational subsidy over the budgeted amount from the state as a result of the final enacted state budget. That was extremely welcome news for the school district. That is something that I know that the board advocated for. The Portland delegation worked very hard to get that to happen. City of Portland voters voted to approve 3 options for additional revenue or any combination of that, including spending the new revenue, creating a reserve, or using the funds from the tax relief. I recommended to the Finance Committee that we use the funds in the way that's described in your packet. So that is, in essence, $1 million that is set aside for tax relief of some form, either in the form of a reserve or in a form yet to be determined that would be returning that money directly to taxpayers. And then we have about $250,000 in one-time expenditures that we've set aside, and that includes roughly $150,000 of that, which would go for the health centers, because as you know, as part of that package that got us the additional money, there were some decisions made in Augusta about programs that would continue and not continue, and one of those was the elimination of the school-based health centers. And so we are obviously in a position where we have the resources to be able to sustain that for this year and are working actively to figure out the long-term viability and health of the health centers. And then the remainder of the funding, so roughly $500,000, is to reinstate cuts that were made during the budget process, as well as to support some of the comprehensive plan initiatives that we had originally proposed to the board and had not been funded because of the revenue limitations that we were dealing with. So that includes some of the mentoring supports that we proposed. It includes the establishment of a newcomer center for English language learners at the middle school level, as well as restoration of the 10% allocation that had been removed from schools' direct budget, and the Seal of Biliteracy testing program. We also, during the budget process, learned that we had lost $100,000 that we have traditionally received for the implementation of our district's proficiency work, and so that's also included as a budget item. So the Finance Committee, as you know, met jointly with the City Finance Committee on August 24th, and later voted to recommend the supplemental budget to the board. The Finance Committee recommended the creation of the stabilization reserve and the additional expenditures that I just described. So with that, we are now at the point that we are asking for your approval of the budget. The next steps in that budget process is that after you act on it and it's approved, it would be to move it forward to the council for their approval for review of the city finance committee, and then eventually the council's review and approval.
Are there any questions on the motion? Ms. Thompson?
Thank you. I just have a few questions to the superintendent. The positions that are coming in to make it happen, mentoring, ELL, Lincoln Moore, King, social worker, are these one-year only positions?
They are not.
Okay. And then with these positions, and I think that we received indication from the state that we may get further reductions last year, and I would assume that there's some sort of sustainability plan going into place to keep these positions if they're not 1 year. And then I just want to make sure that we're not looking to add and then again next year be hit, which may come, and then reduce them again. So I just didn't want to play flip-flop with some of these positions.
Yeah, and obviously you know that there's no certainty around any of those things. We are confident in terms of the budget for next year. It was a biennial budget, the budget for next year. We don't obviously have the final numbers from the state, but we feel that we will have additional revenue even over what we received this year in next year's budget. But we've been very careful about adding additional costs, and so that's why we limited the number of positions that we were creating. These, we believe, are critical positions to being able to achieve what we set out to achieve in the comprehensive plan. So if we are at a place of having to reduce, obviously these will be looked at in the context of everything else that we need to look at, but these are tremendously important positions from my perspective, and as you know, it was a big part of our goal when we brought the budget forward last year.
Thank you. And I just have one further question. On the health centers, while we know obviously this is getting us through this year, I didn't know whether or not there are conversations starting up with regards to long-term sustainability for Portland with those, and if we can get, before we get too far down the road with our budget process, if we can get an update as to possibly any legislation, not that that necessarily can be counted on, but any plans or discussions that you may have with people, and that it will be early enough so that the board can be involved for advocating for funds for the health center. I just don't want us to get too far down the road and not have that discussed further.
Yeah. And as I've communicated earlier, we made this commitment to the health centers this year because we think that they're incredibly important. And we also had very substantive conversations with Greater Portland Health, who administers the health centers, and they understood that this was intended to be a 1-year infusion to allow them to figure out alternatives. So they are actively working on that, and we are partners with them in that process, and we will continue to update you. We also are working with the Portland delegation and with Greater Portland Health to introduce legislation in the emergency session to reinstate that funding going forward. So again, as you said, there's no guarantees, but that is something that we discussed at our legislative meeting last week and is a priority. We have a sponsor, and we believe that it is something that will have bipartisan support, because this has affected not just Portland but other school districts throughout the state that also value and know the importance of the health centers.
Any other questions on the motion? Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chair. So just one more question on the health centers. The $145,000, is that going to allow the health centers to operate at the same capacity as they have in the past?
Yes, absolutely. That is to be able to fully operate without any changes.
Excellent. And I was hoping if briefly the superintendent could give, for the sake of the public and board, having more information, a summary or a quick description of what the new arrival center will look like, how many students we anticipate will be served through there, and how the students will then move to their home schools or their neighborhood schools.
And so I'll do my best to do that succinctly, but I do urge you to come and visit. It's a exciting place, and good things are happening as it gets off the ground. The Newcomer Center, it's a new concept for us. It's the first time that we've done it, but it was something that was envisioned and actually a recommendation of the Center for Applied Linguistics evaluation of the district's English language learners programs a number of years ago. I don't remember exactly, maybe 2012 might have been when that, and so it's something that the district has talked about doing for a number of years, and, you know, again, we made it a central part, a strategy in our comprehensive plan. The idea with the Newcomer Center is to take students who are arriving in Portland schools with, and there's actually an acronym because there's always acronyms for everything in education, SLIFE, which is students with limited or interrupted formal education. So those are kids that, you know, were in some, you know, some event in their life that caused them not to be able to go continuously to school. So kids may have been in a resettlement camp, or they may have just been on the run or something along those lines. And so they may arrive in 6th grade with maybe 3 years of education and stuff. So those are kids that obviously need some intensive support, and that's what the Newcomer Center does. We have 1.5 teachers, and we are in the process of hiring the ed tech that is also going to serve to extend the day so that the kids can get additional time in school and also participate in extracurricular activities around the community and things along those lines. The goal of the program is to obviously help to acclimate them to the American education system, while at the same time really sort of backfilling all of the skills that they would have missed because of their interrupted education. We hope that it's a 6-month to a 1-year process for kids, and then they will go to their regular school. We have, I believe, 10 kids. I don't know if anybody, 8 kids right now that have been identified. And the bulk of them are actual King kids, which is their home school, so that transition will be easier. We also have a .2 social worker who is assigned to the school to help with the trauma issues and things along those lines that the kids may be suffering, as well as to sort of coordinate social services for families and so on. So we're really excited about it. This is not, you know, even though it's new to us, this is not a new concept. This is you know, commonly used as a strategy for working with those students with that limited formal education.
Any other questions on the motion? Students, any questions? Nope. Seeing none, is there any public comment on the motion? Seeing none, any board discussion on the motion? Ms. Bendel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to encourage my colleagues to support this motion tonight. I think that as somebody who's followed, who's been a part of the Finance Committee for the past few years, who's been a part of this this past budget development process, I think that the presentation and the proposal in front of us reflects a smart investment for our students and our city. It prioritizes tax relief for future years. It restores key investments in equity. It addresses immediate needs that the state budget left gaps in, such as the health center funding and needed professional development towards proficiency. And last but not least, we also wanted to make sure that the schools started the year whole again. And so I think that's, given the amount of things that we had to decide on, I think that these are the right areas for the board to consider. And I would encourage you to vote in support of it and also to continue your advocacy for it at the city council level.
Thank you. Any other comments? Students, any comments? No? Seeing none, I will call for a vote. All those in favor of approving the vote entitled "Vote to Request that City Council Approve to Validate a Supplemental 2017-2018 School Budget be approved in form presented to this meeting and that an attested copy of said vote be included with the minutes of this meeting," please indicate. It's unanimous with the students voting in the affirmative. And we're on to new business. We have a first read to authorize the board chair to sign a contract with the town of Long Island for educational services from 2017 to 2018. And we have a first read to adopt the resolution in support of public education. And we have a first read pursuant to sections 2307 and 1485-4 of Title 21A to authorize the superintendent of schools to transfer from available funds budgeted for the FY 2017 fiscal year operating budget not more than 5% of the total appropriation for any cost center to another cost center or among other cost centers of FY 2017 fiscal year operating budget, provided that the total FY 2017 fiscal year operating budget shall not be increased by such transfers. The superintendent shall provide written communication at the time such authority is exercised. And where those are first reads, we do not have any comment. So,
Looking at the copy of the agenda at our place and the copy that was sent to us, I'm wondering if there's a page missing. Just because it, oh, I see it. Okay, nope, I've got it.
okay. Okay, we're in personnel. Consideration and action to approve the personnel items listed. Is there a motion? Ms. Vendel, seconded by Mr. Rodriguez. We're doing election of non-bargaining, yes. Would the superintendent like to speak to the motion?
Yes, and before I do that, though, because we have with us Brian Kavanaugh, who's our new Director of Social Emotional Learning. And Brian, as you know, was approved at the, I believe, September 5th meeting of the board, but this is his first time at a board meeting, so I wanted you to have the opportunity to meet Brian wave. So Brian is our new Director of Social Emotional Learning. He has worked as a teacher, program administrator, behavioral consultant, and professor. Over the past 10 years, he's provided training and professional development in the realm of social emotional learning topics to thousands of educators across Maine and Massachusetts. Brian has a doctorate in special education and educational psychology from the University of Maine, a master's degree in risk and prevention from Harvard, and a bachelor's degree from the University of Maine, Farmington. Brian's position is a key element of our comprehensive plan, as you know, and it's made possible through our partnership with Portland Connect Ed with generous support from the John T. Gorman Foundation. So, Brian, welcome to Portland Public Schools, and I don't know if you have anything you want to say, or, yeah.
Really appreciate the opportunity that the district has given me, and over my first 3 weeks in the district, I've been really just amazed and excited about the enthusiasm from the educators and administrators that I've met, thinking about how to move this work forward. So it's really exciting, and I'm just happy to be a part of it. So I appreciate everyone's efforts in making this a significant part of the plan going forward. So thank you.
So we're obviously incredibly excited to have the level of expertise of Brian working on this really important part of our district work. I know that Sue Olafson is here. Sue was part of the interview committee and a huge proponent of our work in this. So I want to also recognize Sue and thank her for her work on that, as well as the rest of the team, many of whom are here, Malia and Deb. I'm trying to think who else was, is anybody else here that was part of the interview process? Yeah, so again, welcome aboard, Brian. I'm also happy to inform you that Stephen Stilfen will be joining the district as our facilities director. Stephen will begin work on September 29th. He's currently the facilities director in Kittery, where he's worked for the past 6 years. Prior to that, he was facilities director at Piper Shores in Scarborough, and before that, he worked for 20 years as a ship engineer. Mr. Stilfen has a degree in engineering from the Maine Maritime Academy, and for those of you who recognize the name, he has deep family roots in the Portland Public School, and he's also worked as an athletic coach in the district before, at Deering, as a matter of fact. So we're really happy to have Stephen. He will be joining us, as I said, on the 29th, and so I hope to have him here so that you can meet him at the October 3rd meeting. In terms of the positions that we're asking you to act on tonight, the positions all are included in the budget, with the exception of the additional, so it's an increased kindergarten position at East End Community School. That position, as you may recall, had been reduced in last year's budget process, but we added it back as a result of the higher than expected enrollment, and that position will be funded through our retirement savings. That's it. We're done.
I think she's asking you to clarify whether your comments on that spoke to both motions in front of us.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
Or if we
didn't
were just on the
realize
first
that you
one.
had two motions.
We have election of probationary teachers separate.
Right, and that's the only thing that you're being asked to act on, because Mr. Stilfen's is my appointment, so it's not an action on the part of the board.
We have the non-bargaining first, and then the probationary teachers second.
So, Barb, I don't believe that the board needs to act on that. Right. So that's the only thing that you actually have. So this is, that should not have been on there as a motion.
Okay, so then we'll skip ahead to consideration and action to approve the personnel items listed with the subsection election of probationary teachers. Okay. Yeah, as a slate. Ms. Thompson, seconded by Mr. Eater. So we've already had the superintendent speak to that motion. And there is no public comment where it is a personnel item. Are there any other questions by board members? Any comments by board members? Seeing none, I would call for a vote. All those in favor of approving the personnel items listed, please indicate. It's unanimous with the students voting in the affirmative. And we are on to board focus on educational issues. We have Transportation Department Director update. Would the superintendent like to introduce this?
Yes, absolutely. In January of 2016, the administration discussed with the board's operation committees that the district would be moving forward with the purchase of diesel-powered buses rather than clean natural gas buses. And there are a number of reasons for this shift. The operations committee heard about it back in January of 2016, and then again, we provided an in-depth presentation to the operations committee during its August meeting. Subsequent to that, the operations committee determined that it would be appropriate for the entire board to understand this change of direction, and thus we placed it on this on tonight's agenda. So I've asked Transportation Director Fred Barlow to provide this in-depth presentation and discussion with the board. So, Fred? I got it. Don't worry about it. I'll come around.
Good evening, and thank you. I'm going to get right into the program for tonight. The purpose of tonight's program is everybody settled? I don't want to be rushing you at all, but okay, so now I'd like to get into the program. So, thank you very much. There have been several questions raised about our school buses. Is there a best fuel? Granted, in the past, there was clearly a better fuel from an environmental perspective than today, but we'd like to talk in a lot of detail today about how technology has evolved. We'd like to talk about our fleet renewal strategies, and as the superintendent alluded, we do wish to move away from the CNG buses that were purchased over the past few years and move into diesel. I think there are some very solid operational reasons and environmental reasons to look at that now. We'd also like to contrast what we're doing with what Metro is doing, because Metro does impact our students and our community. We are looking at the types of small vehicles that we run. We're looking at small school buses. We've purchased 2, and we're looking to phase out the minivans that have been running for several years. And propane is the new technology on the horizon. We'd like to talk a little bit about that. So going right into our strategy, as the superintendent mentioned, we did meet with the operations committee in some depth on January 21st of 16. And one of the questions that came up is, what does the American Lung Association say about diesel engines? That was the gold standard for the school district for so many years. And we produced a report that the American Lung Association put out that basically said there's no difference. Technology has evolved to the point where there used to be a difference, but not anymore. We talked about our renewal strategy at that meeting. And tonight we'd also like to focus on how we operate our fleet, what that does in terms of our efficiency and our operations. And I'd like to get right into it. So when you think about how economically and efficiently we can operate our transportation system, 30% of our efficiency is manageable. We have a major push on this year for minimizing idle time, making sure that our miles are being used effectively. We're not traveling where we don't need to travel. We're optimizing bus stop locations. We started that in a major way 2 years ago. If those of you who remember September 2 years ago, when we went from going up and down numerous streets, many streets, most streets, to corner bus stops. Driving conditions, not too much we can do to control those. We can control our preventive maintenance. There was a time, quite frankly, when our maintenance was 100% budget driven. And I am told by numerous folks that if we ran out of money in February, maintenance ended in February until the new budget year started. And that may be very efficient for that year and make us look really good for that year, but long term it doesn't take care of our fleet, and it's not doing our environment any favors either. The engines that we use, the drive lines that we use, how we match the transmissions and the rear axle ratios with our engines, making sure that our tires are in good condition, properly inflated. Vehicle design, not too much on school buses, but they have made some changes over the last 15 or 20 years in our school bus designs. So at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is take that which is manageable and optimize it. So what are we trying to optimize? Well, we want to be as sustainable as we possibly can. And we hope to talk tonight a little bit about what that means, how sustainable is sustainable, and what is the gold standard as of 2017. We want to keep our lifetime costs as low as possible, keep our vehicle performance up, and that includes the operational capabilities of our fleet. We want to make sure our vehicles are efficient, and we want to maximize uptime. So we have 4 fuel platforms on the market today. Clean diesel it's come a long way, and we have some slides later on that will show just how far clean diesel has come over the years. Compressed natural gas, we have the only CNG buses in the state. Propane is coming along. It came out in 2010, took off very, very slowly. It's starting to come into its own a little bit, but I talked to one of my colleagues in Scarborough just 2 days ago, and she was saying that some of the operational constraints that they have with their propane buses as far as how far they can go and how far they can stray from the fuel facility is very similar to the kind of challenges that we are having with our CNG buses. The other thing that's pretty exciting, gasoline as a power source for large school buses was just announced within the past model year. And it's just beginning to take off. Those of you who may have ever rented a large U-Haul with a gasoline engine, that's the type of engine that's now going into school buses. Back in the 90s, diesel engines were essentially the only power source for school buses because gasoline was considered to be a flammable. It had concern in terms of how flammable it would be in the course of a collision or such, and fuel spills and such. So now they've managed to bring it along to the point where we can again return it to school buses. I understand that they have pretty good fuel economy, pretty good pickup, and it's something that we will continue to look at as they evolve. I always hesitate to be first. Let somebody else work out some of the kinks before we put our children in it. But in terms of the cost considerations, CNG has been the most stable of the available fuels. It's had less fluctuations than has been the case for fossil fuels. I have a slide on that coming up, but what I can tell you is that when we consider the cost of our fuel, it's not just what the gas utility or the diesel supplier is charging, because we also pay a percentage of what it costs the city to maintain the fuel pumps, what it costs Metro to maintain the CNG fuel facility. We pay our share based on how much of that we're using. So that goes into our pricing. So when there's work to be done on infrastructure, our costs are impacted as such because we do not own our own fuel facilities. The price of buying a new diesel bus is significantly lower than buying a propane powered bus or a CNG powered bus. And what's really important here is that you can take a diesel bus any place because you can always put diesel fuel in. Taking it someplace where they have a CNG or a propane infrastructure is very limiting in what you can do with that school bus. And there's a note on the bottom of these slides. All the engines are required to meet the identical emission standards for nitrous oxide and for particulate matter. So at the end of the day, a diesel engine has to meet the same emissions standards as the propane engine, as a CNG engine, as a gasoline engine. There's no changes. The other thing that I would like to point out about these slides as we go through, there's an asterisk next to the header on many of these slides. we, being Portland Schools, there are 3 school bus manufacturers. Thomas Built Buses is one, Bluebird Corporation is another, and International Corporation is the third. We have buses made by all of these manufacturers in our fleet. In my view, they're relatively similar. And in this case, Thomas Built Buses, as an example, they sell propane, they sell CNG, they sell diesel, and they sell gasoline. So they don't have a horse in the race in terms of which one is better. To them, as long as you buy a Thomas bus, they don't care what powers it down the road. They're in the business of selling buses. So Thomas is a subsidiary of Daimler Corporation, and Daimler is the biggest player in the game compared to the other two's heritage. So they provided a lot of the foundation for what I'm sharing tonight, and I did qualify it as such with the asterisks. So in terms of efficiency considerations, how efficient an engine is dependent on how hot the fuel burns. The BTU, think of a BTU, a thermal unit, as how powerful your air conditioner or your furnace is at your house. Those are BTUs, it's the same thing. And when we are looking at this, the hotter it burns, the more efficient it is. Whether you're talking about a gallon of diesel, a gallon of unleaded gasoline, a gas equivalent gallon of compressed natural gas or propane. So making all of these equal, diesel burns hotter than anything else. Just to keep everything constant, the industry average for, at least published anyway, is 8 to 10 miles per gallon for diesel. That in colder weather, we're not going to get 8 miles a gallon, we're going to get less. But when we're taking them on the highway, when we're taking them on trips, we can get 11 or 12. So it does average out. CNG, it's about 91% as efficient. It burns not quite as hot. Gasoline is almost identical to CNG. Propane burns a lot less efficiently per equivalent gallon. So basically what that means, it's going to take more units of propane to go a certain distance than it's going to take units of CNG, than it's going to take units of diesel. So in terms of efficiency, that's our basis for measurement. CNG has always been the cleanest burning of all available fuel choices. And the reason for that, there's no fossil fuel particulates that can get into the environment, and the nitrogen oxide emissions are far lower. They always have been. So with ultra-low sulfur diesel that has come on the market over the past few years, the emissions has become far more efficient. The nitrogen oxide and particulate emissions output are essentially that of CNG, which is negligible. And the ultra-low sulfur diesel, essentially the way it works is the diesel fuel is more energy or more environmentally efficient than it used to be. That's one reason if you go to a fuel pump and you see on-road and off-road diesel, the on-road diesel has already been treated. The DEF fluid is a chemical that goes in that basically at a very high temperature burns off whatever particulates might get into the environment. So what comes out of the tailpipe is as clean as what comes out of the tailpipe on a CNG bus. And in terms of the technology, the first clean diesel buses, if you will, they had some issues, and they got better over the years. And the DEF system, the afterburner technology in the new diesel engines, fewer parts, the parts are more integrated, and supposedly less likely to fail, and just by looking at them from a layman's perspective, there's less there to fail than there used to be. In terms of CNG, CNG uses renewable natural gas, but more and more natural gas is being sourced through fracking. I grew up in upstate New York, and I was there not too long ago, and there is a lot of shale in upstate New York, and there are a lot of lawn signs, no fracking in upstate New York. And I was in New Hampshire last weekend, and I saw some signs, no fracking. And remarkably enough, you see very, very few signs that say, yeah, let's go ahead and do fracking. You just by comparison. And in terms of ultra low sulfur diesel, yes, have there been petroleum incidents? The Exxon Valdez, there was a BP incident in the Gulf, but relative to the volume of petroleum that is mined and processed, yes, they get a lot of press, and they are catastrophic, but they're remarkably infrequent. Fracking, there's a lot you don't know about it. In terms of diesel, there are global market drivers that impact supply and demand. The hurricane down in Texas impacted or is impacting. And natural gas, as I put a quote in there, I'm not going to read it, from Greenpeace, but basically what it says is they put a lot of nasty stuff into the ground to get the natural gas out. So in the past, where natural gas may have been relatively safe to harvest, not necessarily the case anymore. Daimler puts out the same sort of material that is out throughout the industry. The other manufacturers have materials that are not dissimilar to this, but I use the Daimler model in its entirety. And basically what this is doing is comparing low sulfur diesel with CNG. And they're saying that by and large, CNG has a lower unit cost than diesel. Diesel does burn hotter, so it's a little bit more efficient than CNG. It's cheaper to buy a it's cheaper to buy a diesel bus than a CNG bus. Diesel buses can use existing infrastructure. They can pull into any fuel station and continue down the road, whereas CNGs are extremely limited. No changes are necessary in any existing fuel facilities, where a CNG has to start from ground level and be built forward. Therefore, you can take a diesel bus just about any place, but you are very constrained with a CNG. Prior to a previous presentation that week, we had a last-minute request for a trip, and sure, we can do it. We get last-minute requests from time to time, and we looked in the yard after we said, yes, we can do it, and we had a CNG bus, and that's what we sent to Massabesic. And I was sitting in a diesel bus, probably about 20 miles out of town, just in case we didn't make it back. That's the kind of constraint that we have on our CNG buses. And we made it back, and we were very low, but we did make it back. Everybody was safe, and I took the empty bus and parked it, which is great, but we shouldn't have to run on such a narrow margin. In terms of low sulfur diesel, the emissions are, when the chart was put out, there were still a few changes, but as I'm going to show you in the next couple of charts that I'm going to put up, they're essentially similar. In terms of maintenance, on an industry-wide basis, it's argued that CNG has lower maintenance costs, although I'm going to show you in a little bit that that's not necessarily the case. In fact, I can prove it wasn't the case here in Portland. Drivability, to me, I've driven both sorts of buses. I've had my license now for quite a few years. I don't see a difference in drivability between the engines, to be very candid with you. And I've driven buses with other carriers before I came to Portland, and I still don't see a difference in drivability. In terms of driver preference, drivers prefer diesel because they're quicker and easier to fill up. They're more versatile in terms of where they can go. They don't have to get into some other bus to go do a trip. So there is a preference for diesel buses. Again, this is nationwide information. So in terms of nitrogen oxides, the government EPA emission standards that have been out since 1998 are on the screen for you. So if you look at 1998 and say, wow, they were allowed to have 10.7 parts per million nitrogen oxides coming out of that tailpipe. Whereas now we are allowed to have, by government regulations, 0.2% nitrogen oxides. So if you work out the percentages, we were, by running CNG buses when they first were starting to be discussed in 2003, 2004, when the government EPA limits were 5 parts per million and then 4 parts per million. If you look at what that means, we were running CNG buses that were, the limits were 2,400% greater than what our CNGs were. Of course, they made huge sense. And then in 2006, we were still 1,900% higher in terms of what the government allowed than what we were running. It's not arguable that CNGs in their day were the way to go. But in 2014, when it's 0.2%, and you say, 0.2 parts per million coming out of that tailpipe, that is so low that the difference between a CNG bus and a diesel bus, in terms of the child standing on the sidewalk while the bus is idling, negligible. Negligible. So in terms of particulate matter, again, the idea is to have 0 particulates come out of the tailpipe. And back when we were discussing CNG buses, our diesels could put out 400% more particulates than CNG. Of course, it made tremendous sense to look at CNG buses, but now the difference is negligible. And when you look at the operational constraints, in my view, at the very least, it's very, very hard to justify a negligible, if any, definitive difference in emissions with the operational constraints of CNG. But we'll go into that just a little bit more. Let's talk a little bit about the cost and the funding and all that sort of thing. If you look at those charts, there are huge changes in terms of what can come out of the tailpipes in 2002, then again 2005, and then again 2010. So Tier 1 emissions, where the chart took that huge nosedive, were effective in 2002. Tier 2 emissions were effective in 2005. And Tier 3 emissions, which are still in effect, were effective in 2010. Of our buses, 29 of them are Tier 3. One of them is Tier 2, and that's up for CIP replacement in the current fiscal year. We have not applied for funding during the 3 most recent fiscal years, and the competition for funding is intense. There are some folks, I am told, who are running Tier 1 buses. I know there are quite a few school departments running Tier 2 buses. And departments that are running older buses have a much greater chance of getting approved for grant money than someone like Portland, where we're just about there. we're just about as good as you can get to meet government standards. In terms of, there's a settlement out there, the Volkswagen Clean Air Settlement is the most recent major grant funding opportunity. I'm told, I have conflicting information, and quite frankly, I don't have a definitive answer. I am told that funding has been awarded by propane-powered school buses, and today I was trying to verify that, and I was told no, funding through the Volkswagen Clean Air Act has not been provided for any school buses. So I'm still trying to pin that one down. I'm much more at this point, and I have not changed the PowerPoint since this afternoon when I reached someone at the state. The administrator at the state EPA, who's the subject matter expert on this, is out until next week. It has been out, so I'll try to get a better answer for you on this moving forward. In terms of propane, it's unproven, in my view, even though the fourth generation is better than the other generations of tanks are lighter and such, but they're still working on it. Right now, we have 3 fuel platforms here. We have gasoline for our smaller vehicles, we have diesel, and we have CNG. A 4th fuel platform is going to take what's already a complex operation and make it even more complex. So what I respectfully, my takeaway from such conversations is Volkswagen settlements and the like. If we apply, if we are, for whatever reason, approved, be careful what you wish for, because we could end up with propane buses on top of our CNGs and our gasoline and our diesel, which it takes a complex operation and just makes it even more complex. And those of you who watch News Center 6, I pulled something off their website on the 13th, just a few days ago. One of our neighboring school districts had to evacuate a school bus on its way to elementary school Wednesday morning. Maine State Police say there was a strong smell of propane reported, and it was the catalyst for the evacuations, and it goes on. But the truth of the matter is, that school district has had propane since first or second generation vehicles came out. But it's still when a bus breaks down, and buses do break down periodically, it's a machine. We've had one breakdown in the past probably 7-8 months where we've had to replace a radiator hose blew. The clamp and the hose ceased to hold, and we had fluid around, and we had to bring another bus. That didn't make the news. It was a non-event. It was a delay of about 45 minutes. We got another bus for the students and brought them back. It didn't make Channel 6. In terms of what other school districts are doing, I took 3 of our neighbors, being Scarborough, Westbrook, South Portland, and what I called this is very scientific, I called their directors and said, tell me about your fleet. And interestingly enough, I put it in by percentages so that we have an apples by apples comparison here. And the green is alternative fuel. Westbrook and South Portland do not have any alternative fuel vehicles on the road. Scarborough does have some propane. And when I asked about the propane, the first thing that their director said is you can't take them anywhere, to use her words. Yes, you can take them places just as long as they're close. Same as our CNGs. And if you look at, if you would please, look at the percentage ratios of gasoline to diesel, not dissimilar. For Scarborough, who operates alternative fuel propane buses, they're 18%, we're 30%. They're not quite 2/3 of what we are, but the other 2 districts aren't even in the race. We also looked at the other neighboring school districts in terms of what comprises their fleets. And in terms of percentages, by percentage, we have more vans and minivans by percentage than any of our neighbors at 16.7. And those will be going down as the two middle categories being 14 passenger and 30 passenger school buses. We've got two 30s. That's going to stay constant, but we are looking to replace the minivans with type A 14 passenger school bus vehicles with 8-way lights and stop arms and National School Bus Chrome Yellow. So our van number is going to decrease, and the gray bar for 14 passenger type A vehicles is going to increase. In terms of our current fleet versus Metro, we are moving towards diesel power, but right now we have about 58% of our buses are diesel versus, and these are large buses only, diesel versus CNG, very similar to the percentage that Metro has. And in terms of Metro's fleet renewal, when Metro, and this is before I came to the school department, but I've done a little bit of research into it, and I'm confident in telling you that Metro was extremely transparent to Portland Public Schools in the conversations about taking over high school service, in that Metro did not have enough equipment, and the equipment that they had were 35-foot long diesel buses, not 40-foot long diesel buses, which really is what you should be using for our high school routes. You need that space. So they went out and sourced some not quite ready for prime time 40-foot diesel buses, and they told us that they would be in service on a temporary basis, and they defined that, as I understand, as a 3-year horizon. And when you enter into the process of renewing a transit fleet, it's usually a 2 or 3 year process, and they're pretty much right on schedule. They have 11 new 40-foot long buses scheduled to enter service this year, and then they have another 10 additional 40-foot buses scheduled to enter service during FY19, but mostly FY20. So what these 21 new large buses are going to enable Metro to do is to take this temporary fleet and just get rid of them. They're not going to be on the road any longer. The other thing is they have 11 2005 model diesel buses. If you notice them driving around, they're the ones with the 500 series numbers on them, 531, 534, and so on. Those are 2005 buses, and those will be retired by FY20, by calendar year 2021. And basically what that means is that just like Portland Public Schools, Metro will be entirely Tier 3 once this process has run its course, which is phenomenal. There are not that many transit agencies, especially smaller transit agencies, or mid-sized transit agencies, if you will. Most of them have older buses, a lot more older buses than Metro does. In terms of state funding, the replacement threshold for a Type D bus. A Type D bus, think of a Metro bus with a flat front on it, like our CNG buses are. Those are Type D buses. They have to run for 15 years and 300,000 miles to be eligible for state replacement. There's a new law, Chapter 85, which it was proposed when I did the PowerPoint. It came into effect yesterday. I got the email, so did the Superintendent Botana. So Chapter 85, as of now, it's 14 years and 245,000 miles. We're still not going to make it in Portland. We don't put enough miles on our buses. The Type C diesel buses, on the other hand, are 10 years and 125,000, and we do make those thresholds. And we have had, the state has been relatively good to us. It's extremely good to us relative to certain other school departments in terms of the numbers of buses that have been approved for funding. Minivans, regardless of who's running them, whichever school department it is, are not eligible for state funding, period. If we were to say to the state, we'd like to go and replace our current minivan number 2 with minivan number 11, no. Not, if you do, we're not paying for it. We talked a little bit about the Volkswagen settlement. There's something called DERA, which is Diesel Emissions Reduction Act awards. During the calendar years, or actually the award years of 2012 through 2016, interestingly enough, I could not find the total number of awards that EPA has given out, so I counted them. And I counted 146. I hope I counted correctly. I think I'm pretty close. Maine received one of those awards, and that was in 2012 for CNG buses, which came here, and it had money in that grant to repower 2 marine vessels and 4 engines to Tier 3 standards. Those were marine grants that came to Maine. Otherwise, all of the grants have come elsewhere. The 2016 school bus replacement or retrofit program, it's part of what EPA offers. The number that they expect to be in the 2016 plan, according to the website, the EPA website, is $7.25 million. There are 420 applicants on the wait list, and there were 2 recipients in Maine of money, RSU 21 and RSU 24. And everybody else, there were a lot of recipients from places like California. And I added this slide late in the game because that's what I heard today, that the VW settlement had not yet been allocated. And as I say, this is where I'm taking that information as more veracity than what I had in there earlier. I was tweaking till the last minute, folks, tweaking the PowerPoint a little bit. And when I called one of the folks who tends to be active statewide in pupil transportation, and I said, what do you know about the VW settlement? Give me the good information. And the answer was, write the governor and tell the governor that some of that money should go to school bus renewal. I'm just repeating it. So, in terms of fuel sourcing, we have one source of CNG in the entire state of Maine, and those are the 2 nozzles in the single fuel station at Metro. If Metro's facility goes down, so does our availability to fuel 11 of our school buses. We talked about that limited range for trips, so I'm not going to beat that dead horse, but it's extremely, extremely constraining. I'm not sure if you're aware that Portland Public Schools has been restricted to certain times for fueling at Metro. They strongly prefer that once we start our PM runs, which we usually define as 1 o'clock, they don't want to see us for the rest of the day. To the point that take that night I was talking about with Massabesic, I called Metro and said, sorry guys, I really need to bring one of these in, and I'll be here about 6, 7, whatever time it was. That's the degree to which they are asking us not to fuel during those other times. Just a couple of other things. Winter of 2013, when Metro's pumps froze, we were unable to fuel CNG buses, and we closed school, I believe, for 1 day. If we had a problem last school year with a city-owned diesel and unleaded pumps downtown. Did anybody know about it? Because there were other ways to source that fuel, and it was seamless to our students, seamless to our drivers, seamless to our community. August 2015, there has been a mandate federally since the mid-2000s, mid to late 2000s, say 2005, 6, 7. I have not been able to get an exact date, but mid-2000s, that basically says that every CNG bus must be inspected by a federally certified inspector. Can be from the private sector, that's where we got ours, but they have to have federal certification. Every 3 years, they have to be certified as safe, as having the tank safe, the fuel line safe, the fuel system safe. And I'm sure a few of you may have recalled that back in 2015 in August, right before we were ready to start school, the mechanic at Metro said, we have to actually the mechanic at South Portland was doing our regular 6-month inspection and said, you know, that valve looks a little corroded. You should probably get a new valve for that tank. Great. We took the tank to Metro, and the mechanic at Metro said, no way to replace the valve, you got to replace the tank. So we called the manufacturer of the tank, who said, oh, when was the last time you inspected them? And that's when we found out we should have been doing it every 3 years. So we did. What we found out was that we had 3 2007 model year CNG buses that all of the tanks, the lines, and other parts of the fuel system needed replacement to the point that they just were not worth saving. And we scrapped 3 perfectly good school buses. It cost us close to $45,000 in parts, in labor, in other expenses to bring an inspector in. The first one, we brought an inspector in from Connecticut, and then somebody in New Hampshire became certified and inspected the remainder of our buses. And they were very, very fair to us. They gave us time. You know what, I'm just going to leave this here and go home, and if this particular part is moved 1/8 of an inch when I get back, and that's how we got through for $45,000. They were very, very fair to us. Our maintenance costs in FY16, 1 3/4 times more expensive for CNGs. We took our costs for maintenance done at South Portland for non-fuel related items, and maintenance done at Metro and other places, Cummins Motors and such, for CNG related items, added them together, and we spent $163,000 on our CNG fleet and $93,000 on our diesel fleet, and that's 2016 fiscal year. This year, some of the lowlights of our maintenance program, our bus 69, it's a CNG model year 2009. The fuel catalyst system, there are 2 of them on the bus, each of which has related parts to it. Cost us $9,100 to get that bus back on the road when it failed. Our bus 86, which is a 2014 bus, cost us over $4,000 for an ignition system, and that's just this fiscal year. So these CNG buses are, yes, I remember the nationwide figures where CNG costs less to maintain, but that's not been the demonstrated case here at Portland Public Schools. In terms of the type of vehicles that we're looking at, on the left is a 14-passenger. It's actually a 15-passenger vehicle. The driver counts, the assistant counts, so it has 13 student passengers in it. It has 8-way lights. It has all of the school bus standards for body integrity, rollover protection, all the mirrors. It has a step well so that you put a minivan by comparison. I'm not saying that minivans are unsafe. They are safe, but I will say that a school bus is safer. The other thing that comes to mind about school buses, besides when you discharge a student with a minivan, it's a minivan. A school bus, at the very least, the cars are supposed to be stopping. You have a stop sign, you have the red lights. But one of the primary reasons that we use small vehicles is because we go out of the school department to transport students to out-of-district programs. So we have minivans going to Saco. We have minivans going to, for McKinney-Vento students, to other places that involve the turnpike. We have one of our 30-passenger school buses, which looks like that, just a little bit bigger, a little wider, a little longer by one row, goes up and back to Lewiston and Auburn every day, twice a day. And what I would submit to you respectfully is that if we have a problem on the thruway, on the turnpike rather, I'd much rather have it be in a yellow vehicle than in a minivan. We had a non-mechanical reason to pull the vehicle, a minivan, over on the turnpike last school year. And I had time to respond to that location on the turnpike. And by the time I got there, I was there before the state police. I was there, before anyone else who responded to help us out. But a school bus is on the side of the road. There would have been 2 state police troopers there before you could blink an eye, because that's what happens when there's a school bus on the side of the road. So definitively safer in my view. I put down the federal motor vehicle safety standards as to what makes a Type A school bus definitively safer than a minivan. In terms of the Highway Safety Loss Data Institute, basically what they did is they said in terms of a minivan for safety, in terms of the cage, the chances for injury to various parts of your body, they just don't stand up to a school bus, and the comparisons are up there for you. Small school buses are eligible for funding through Maine Department of Education, and as I said earlier, minivans are not. And the language on the website from Maine Department of Education is that school buses are by far the safest way for students to travel to and from school, yet schools often seek information about passenger van use. So I started my first school bus terminal in the fall when school opened in 1986, and I still don't know why people use vans. There was a huge, and this is not minivans, this is those passenger vans, those 15-passenger extended van, that Chevy puts out and Ford puts out a model. It's an E350 extended chassis. Back in the late 90s, early parts of the 2000 decade, there was a lot of press about rollovers in those vehicles. Yet there were numerous school departments nationwide that said, "Oh no, those are fine. We should continue using them." Now, I'm not equating the two, but what I'm saying is if there's a better mousetrap that's definitively better, that's, in my view, the way we should be going. In terms of efficiency, small school buses versus minivans, if you're driving them empty or with one student from point A to point B, certainly a minivan is going to be more fuel efficient, no argument. But if you're looking at what happens when you use a small school bus the way you should and load it efficiently and appropriately, they're far more efficient per student than is the case with a minivan. So we had last summer a minivan route that started out with 3 students, perfect for a minivan, no argument. But by the time we finished the ESY program, it had 6 students in there, plus the driver, which, yes, is that the capacity of a minivan? Yes. Was that an optimally loaded route? Oh no, that minivan, in my view, even though it was a capacity, it was safe, it was legal, it was appropriate, and it was defensible. It was not optimal. That was not the kind of student ridership experience we want for our students. So that's one factor for loading. The other factor for loading is we have some students in the school department who ride best when they are not proximate to other students, when there's space between them and another student. Their ride is better, it's better for the driver, better for the other students in the vehicle. And we have minivan routes with one student because that's how close we can get these students to each other as one student. We can put 2 or 3 students in a minivan, and that can be in a small school bus rather than a minivan, excuse me, that would be fully loaded with 3 students based on the demographics of the students, based on their needs, and based on their ridership experience. And that would be one vehicle taking the place of 3 minivans for that application. And we could put those vehicles to use right now if we had more driver's license to drive them, and we are working on that. In terms of propane, just a little bit more about them. Type C school buses, the large school buses with the engine out front, those are Type C school buses. And I'm told there are approximately 3,000 school buses in the state of Maine. As of when I wrote this presentation in in July, there were 61 in the state that were propane powered, and that was through an industry source. In terms of neighboring states, 73 propane powered school buses in New Hampshire and 2 in Vermont. And we talked about how hot they burn, so I won't go back on that. Propane costs more going in. The fueling infrastructure, they're not cheap. I did a little bit of research on on propane operational infrastructure considerations. In other words, how much does it cost to put on propane fueling system? And one of the folks who I spoke with said, "Oh, you can do it. It won't cost you anything." Great. How? Well, the fuel suppliers, and those are private suppliers generally for propane, will put a system in, and just over the next 5 years, they'll charge you for your fuel to amortize the cost of that fueling. So you're still paying the $48,000 plus permit costs to get a 2,000 gallon tank facility. It just doesn't come in a lump sum. So it's not free. In terms of emissions, does it burn cleaner than diesel? Yes. But in terms of what comes out of the tailpipe, again, not much different. They are on their 4th generation of propane-powered school buses. The tanks are, I'm told, lighter. So theoretically, the lighter buses don't use as much propane to go down the road as the heavier buses did. But they're still, as Channel 6 reported last week, they're still working on them. So the language from the American Lung Association that we shared with the Operations Committee back in January of 2016 is on the slide. And basically what it says is that new model year 2010, which is Tier 3, and later natural gas engines are certified to the same standards as heavy-duty diesel engines. So they're the same standards. We talked about the operational constraints. Our taxpayers, primarily through both the state reimbursement and the CIP, have been very good to us. Our fleet, as a percentage of age, is younger than most. Our aging buses are less of a percentage on our fleet than is the case for the majority of our neighbors. And if if my young nephews were to get into, and nieces were to get into a vehicle, I'd want it to be a school bus, not a minivan. The more fuel platforms that we have, the more complex it is. All engines, whether they're gasoline or diesel or propane or CNG, meet the same requirements. Our recommendation is that we would continue to acquire large diesel buses for fleet renewal purposes. And rather than minivans, we would continue moving to small school buses. And we will certainly monitor alternative fuel technologies as they mature. What I heard in the past week or so about gasoline engines is encouraging. They don't have the DEF fluid and the afterburner technology that a diesel does, yet they still meet the emission standards. The flammability issues that took gasoline out of school bus engines back 20 years ago, not a concern anymore. They've overcome that, so I'm looking at that. I'm very interested in how that goes over with a few of the folks who saw one at the recent association event, and I think are perhaps going to be pursuing one for their fleet here and there, so I'm going to be watching them. And as grants come forward and are made available, we will look at them, and we'll look at them with the objective of, if we're fortunate enough to be chosen as a grant recipient, what does that mean to us, and is that a good thing, and if so, how good a thing is that? So I thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Ms. Thompson.
Thank you very much, and thank you for answering a good majority of my questions. But I'm curious, we went years ago to the minivans because we had a runaway special ed budget for transportation. We were employing taxi cab after taxi cab after taxi cab. And so I guess, and I see that our special ed director is here as well, and that's why we made the movement, because the district was paying out so much money, and it was less expensive and more efficient at that time. And I hear what you're saying with regards to safety, and safety is always of the utmost importance. But I'm just wondering if we've looked at, from the standpoint of special ed costs, do we anticipate the cost will maintain with the switch from the vans to the buses? And what do our numbers look like currently for out of district, and where are we at, I guess, money-wise in transportation?
Interestingly enough, our taxi costs, this year we have we have one taxi that goes AM, PM for a specialized route, and that is costing us about $30 a trip. And the reason for that is because we have a student for whom our resources are not a good fit at this time. Ms. Mullis and I had a conversation last week about how we can make our resources a good fit, but at the moment we're still working that through. We have another taxi cab, AM only, under McKinney-Vento for students who are displaced. We, as a school department, have half of the responsibility for transportation, and wherever it is, either they originate or they're residing, the other school department has half the responsibility. If the other school department is unable or unwilling, we can do both ways and charge half to them. So we have a school department that is having some startup challenges this year, and they asked us if we could do both ways. So we have a taxi cab running for a McKinney-Vento route in the morning, and we're going to be getting reimbursement on that. And we have one student on a specialized route in the afternoon where timing is just not, it just isn't working with our current route structure, and that's about $32 a day. So, and did I misspeak that the one I talked about first is $30 a day, not $30 each way, if I may have misspoken.
Okay. So I guess that when we look at the special ed costs, it sounds as though for transportation that you're anticipating that they'll stay within where they are now, and we're not going to have surges when we switch over from the minivans to the buses. I understand, again, the safety aspect, but it sounds like the taxis are under control more so than they were in the past. But with the switch over, do you anticipate large costs? I mean, I know I'm not asking to look at the future, but
we have a minivan right now that provides service to multiple locations in the afternoon out of district. If we get 2 more students for either of, or both of those schools, 2 more students is going to overload that minivan. At that point, what do we do? With a minibus, we don't, with a small school bus, we don't have that issue. We don't have that challenge because we have that flexibility. We have 2 minivans right now that are working with specialized students that could, the way things are going, be merged into a small school bus when we get our folks licensed to drive them, which we're working on. I don't have a crystal ball, quite candidly, as to what our enrollment is going to look like for McKinney-Vento, for specialized routes, or both. But what I can tell you is that we are making every possible effort to minimize the use of taxi cabs and maximize the use of our vehicles. And the more flexibility we have with our vehicles, the easier it's going to be to meet that goal.
okay. And the last question I guess I have, we've heard a lot of talk about the state and talking about CDL drivers and the shortage, and they're trying to get veterans out to be bus drivers, et cetera. So the switch over from the vans to the buses, will those drivers, you're saying the people that are driving these vans are going to get their CDLs to become bus drivers, and or if they're not, where do you anticipate getting that pool of drivers from?
Well, actually, to drive the 14-passenger buses, they are non-commercial licenses
Okay.
with what they call a numeral 3 endorsement. So the requirements for a CDL driver are not there, which makes it easier to recruit. But getting that license, yes, it does require an endorsement written test, and it does require a road test. But what's different than a school bus is there are a couple things that are different. One is, in a large school bus, you can have 83 students behind you when you're driving a 40-foot long, 96-inch wide vehicle down the street. When you're in a small school bus, you have at most 14 students behind you in a vehicle that's no wider than a 350, 11-passenger van. That's it drives like a Ford van or a Chevy van, like a Chevy Sierra van. They ride nicely. They're quiet. It's easier to find people to drive the smaller ones than it is to drive the larger ones. And since the licensing is not nearly as strict, there are requirements for commercial drivers to maintain their licenses that don't apply to non-commercial drivers who have a 3 endorsement for a minivan. So that makes it a little bit less verboting, if you would. So yes, recruitment will be an ongoing issue. We've been very fortunate here at Portland Public Schools that we've had some folks who have been fully licensed full-time school bus drivers retire and return to us as occasional drivers, trip drivers, and the like. We've been very fortunate. We'd like to think that we can keep that trend going. I don't see why we wouldn't, but we're no different than anyone else, and I know that our day is coming when we're going to have the same challenges that many of our neighbors are facing right now.
And I want to let you know, I do appreciate the research that you put into things, and I was a part of the board when we decided to go to the CNG and continue that, and with the grant funding and so on and so forth. So I appreciate you looking at what the current practices are, and for the EPA and for so on and so forth, what not only cost, because we made an investment, we knew at the time when we invested in the CNGs that they were more costly, but we made a conscious decision to invest in those because of the health, as well as with our plan with the City of Portland through the sustainability plan. And so I'm assuming that this switchover has no effect on the City of Portland sustainability policy, their plans, or anything of that nature with us. We had the Amoresco study done years ago, and I was just, sounds like we're maybe in line with the city then?
My understanding, and you just mentioned a study that I would like to read before I commit to what I'm about to say. So my understanding is that in order to be sustainable, we have to do certain things. We have to make sure that we minimize the harmful effect of what comes out of our tailpipes, and we are doing that with the new clean diesels that we are buying. We need to continue to watch our idling, and we are doing that. That was part of our in-service training this year. We need to make sure that our routes are efficient and optimized and make sense, and that our bus stops are in places that are safe, but they also make sense. And we did that 2 years ago, and although it's not always a popular decision, we're trying to maintain that efficiency and that legitimacy to our routes. And that is my understanding of the sustainability commitment that the city has made, that we are in keeping. If there's a document that I need to read from several years ago, I'd be more than pleased to and respond to that specifically.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your help.
Anything else from board members? Students, anything? No? Ms. Mendel?
I just wanted to say I really appreciated the thoroughness in which you have come to the board to present these issues. I was there, during the time when, we did make the commitment to move towards the CNG buses, and I feel like this is a great way for us to revisit that. This in the current context of new regulations, new changes in technology, fuel, and also areas that that are within our control as a school district to improve for efficiency, such as the idling and the driver operation of the vehicle, and so and the bus pickups and drop-offs locations. So I really appreciate the amount of attention and thoroughness that you gave to this issue. I know it's something that our constituents value as a community that supports the environment, and I think we also appreciate it as a board that we are attentive to minimizing costs for the future.
Just, Ms. Vendel, if I just may add to that equation, maintenance. And also, I just can't emphasize enough how much legitimacy and sense it made back when the decision to go with CNGs was made, and the disparity between CNGs and diesels were astronomical. And that's why, honoring that and recognizing that technology is catching up, I think is a worthwhile discussion to have, and I appreciate you all allowing me to have that with you tonight.
Anything else? Oh, Ms. Davis.
just saying, as the Operations Committee has heard this presentation several times and has been well aware of it. And one of the reasons that we wanted to bring it to the board and also to the viewing public was just as Mr. Barlow has said, that things have changed. And as my colleague, Ms. Van Dil has said, technology has changed. What was a cutting-edge decision in the past, at this point, the context is different. And we wanted to be sure that the board understood the change in direction, that it wasn't a repudiation or dismissal of a decision that was made in the past. It was a re-looking at a new context and new factors and making a decision that we felt comfortable with going forward. And also to underline our commitment as a district to continue to look at this, because I think the thing that has continued from the past to now is we want buses that are safe. We want buses that contribute as little as possible in terms of air pollution and are healthy for our children and our staff to be around and in. And that at the moment, as was mentioned, it's idling, both of buses and of parents and cars, that is cited as the largest contributor to the air pollution and to the health issues. So getting the idling of buses and the idling of cars driven by parents dropping off or waiting for children under control or minimized is really probably the place where we have the most leverage to make a difference for our children. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Thank you, Mr. Barlow.
Thank you very much.
I echo those sentiments as well. This was great information. That brings us to public comment. Where it is before the hour of 10 o'clock, we would take public comment on any items not on this evening's agenda. Seeing no public comment, I would call for a motion for adjournment. Ms. Thompson, seconded by Mr. Rodriguez. All those in favor? It's unanimous with the students voting in the affirmative.